This past Sunday night on the Sports Card Investor channel, we had Patrick Ryan showing off his world-class collection. But today, we're going to dive into how he built such an incredible collection and how can you build a world-class collection if you're starting with maybe not that much money or maybe not that great of a collection. Patrick's collection was built up over the course of many years, and he employed a lot of different strategies about how to approach buying and also how to approach selling and what to sell and how to sell. And it really helped him along the way build his world-class collection. So we're going to dive into that topic today with Patrick Ryan. Get your notebook out because there's a lot of good tips and pointers that he is going to share. This is going to be a great episode. This episode is brought to you by Arena Club. Arena Club is an innovative platform featuring grading and authentication, vaulting, and digital pack openings. Be sure to check out the amazing items up for auction right now at Arena Club. From rare cards to top-tier collectibles, there's something for you at Arena Club. Download the Arena Club app today by searching Arena Club in the App Store on your phone, and then use promo code SCI for 10% off your first purchase of cards at Arena Club. Patrick, I'm excited to dive into this with you today. I know our audience is going to be excited about this conversation because they just saw you go through your entire collection this past Sunday on the Sports Card Investor channel as part of our Slabs episode, our collection tour. And I'm sure many of them were thinking, how did you build such a crazy collection? Because you got literally sitting here alone, we have millions of dollars worth of cards, and you've got all kinds of other artifacts as well. I mean, you've got a many millions of dollars collection here. So it didn't just start with you writing a check for that much money. There was actually a lot of work you did along the way in order to get to it, and the amount of money you put in the beginning stages was much smaller than how the collection blossomed. So tell us the story. Let's jump in.
Yeah, so I think it starts with the fact that I'm a collector at heart, but I'm an investor in practicality.
Okay.
So my heart's collector, mind is an investor, and I don't think you can separate the value of these items, from their collectability. I think from an insurance perspective, the collectability value and how you build your collection, unfortunately, as much as you might love something, there is a value tied to it. And you might have items that are priceless that might have a price on them, but for the sake of reality, everything has some level of value. So you got to kind of understand that and be willing to accept that.
So the idea that somebody could be a true high-end collector and just not care about, not be an investor, not care about value at all, you see it as a little more intertwined than that.
It has to be just from insurance purposes, your will, your estate,
yeah,
especially on the high end. Now, look, I'm sure there's probably some billionaires who really do have a room with millions of dollars of cards and it's not even on their balance sheet. I just can't live in that reality, maybe never. So to that point, I've just got to be smart about adding items. And so the first thing is understand the quality of the sense of, am I willing to go from good to great? Now, look, for people that are oftentimes full-time in the hobby, it's better to have dozens of good items than being tied to a handful of great items. So this is really from a longer-term collecting perspective, not having to immediately, buy and sell things. It's a little bit longer term, but understanding that I'm generally always willing to go from a handful of good items to one great item. So that's one thesis that's helped the collection. And
why is that important? Why do you think, as a collector, why would you rather have one great item than a handful of good items?
Two reasons. I think historically, whether it be the art market, the watch market, real estate market, the best always kind of outperforms the mid-tier. Ultimately, that seems to be the case. I'm sure there's exceptions, but that's one aspect of it. Then I think about my friends like from a secular level. When I say secular, I mean like non-collectors. And I think that if you want to imagine long-term value, we have to have more people enter the collector investor space that are not in it today. So I think about the items that really grab their attention. And quite frankly, even if they don't know the value, the more historically significant items just are bigger draws to the non-collectors.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I've heard this advice before. I know Marshall Fogel, who we did some collection tour videos with, esteemed, unbelievable collector and collection. He always preaches that. He says, buy the best of the best and consolidate what you have to get the best of the best if that's possible. And in the long run, you often see kind of those outsized returns for the very top pieces.
Well, also because I think people oftentimes they're harder, like those items, they're harder to get rid of because they're going to be harder to get back. I think that, in terms of where the sports memorabilia market could go, I do think there's a lot of room for growth. I do think that the high-end growth will be in truly one-of-one items. The PSA 10 Mickey Mantle, there's 3 of them, the 52 tops. That arguably is sort of a one-of-one item. I think the game-used items, they're oftentimes really hard to part with because they are one-of-ones. Look, we've seen a couple dozen Bobby Witt jerseys hit the market in a pretty short time for a young career. Each of those is a one-of-one, despite the fact he has a couple dozen jerseys out there. So I do think that, when something hits the market that hasn't been out there in a long time, there's just interest in it. And we see that in art, right? I mean, right now we're in the middle of some very large art auctions in New York, and we're just seeing these items that hadn't been to market in 20 years. It's feverish, so the best-selling piece of stained glass in 2002 came back on the market, and guess what? It just set the other record for best, highest stained glass. So I think that thesis, is very important. You got to think about your legacy and where your finances are.
But there's a lot of people listening who probably are like, well, that's great in theory, best of the best, but I'm not going to write $1 million checks to buy the best of the best. And you didn't start out that way. You didn't start out writing $1 million checks to buy some of these cards that we have sitting out on the table here. You started smaller, not with the best of the best. So talk to me about that journey. And for those listening who would love to build up to a collection like that over time, but maybe don't have the resources today, how do you get started?
Sure. I started young, right? So in 1987, I was selling baseball cards on the side of the road in front of my house as if it was a lemonade stand. I subscribed to Beckett magazine, and when Beckett would arrive, I was just in a vortex for days, studying it, looking at it, and trying to understand trends. eBay came out and changed everything. So what I'm kind of talking about is having a passion, diving into the passion, doing your homework, and then also understanding technology. Because what happened with eBay was, a Ken Griffey Jr. 1989 Upper Deck card was very rare because you could only find one per store, and maybe your town only had a handful of stores. eBay happens and there's hundreds immediately. So understanding what technology is going to do to the ecosystem for where you sit in the ecosystem. From an investment perspective, I got lucky. So my advice might not be pertinent because I was just ahead of the boom by a couple years. The story was that in 2013, when I got back into it, I bought some Giannis cards. And when I saw that they went 5X, I sold all of them. And the mistake was that they went to 20X. Now, I don't know if there's going to be 5Xers or 20Xers in the sports card market. Really hard to say, right?
That's a challenge today. This story of I got in early. I got in 2013 buying Giannis, or I know we're going to hear about your Luka story and how much money you made on Luka cards back in 2018. That's a great story as well. I want to get to that next. But for people listening today and they're like, well, have I missed it? Am I sitting here today? It's a lot harder for me to tell anybody that, sure, if you go buy Victor Wembanyama cards, they can 5X or 20X. I actually don't believe that's probably true. Maybe there's certain ones, but the overall population of Victor Wembanyama cards out there today would lend me to believe that it's going to be really difficult for the collective of those cards to 5X or 20X over the course of the upcoming years or even decades.
So I think at the core, I got lucky knowing what I really liked and having the assumption that if I like this, there's probably someone else who likes this. So 2 smaller trends that I was fortunate with. I showed the 1990 Score Bo Jackson, bat over shoulder card. And that card meant a lot to me as a kid. So when I got back into the hobby, I bought a PSA 10 copy for myself. But there were others, and it's a relatively low pop card when I say relatively to what we see today. I then bought 12 of them between $50 and $150. And then during the boom, I was selling them for $300, $600. The market certainly come back down. But the thesis was, if this card meant something to me as a kid, and I want a high-end copy of it today, there's probably someone else. So thinking about the lens of what you really actually like and what actually really matters to you, yeah, it might not be a 12-month flip, but you'd be surprised. I think that Topps has a couple inserts. It's kind of a ripoff of the Downtowns, the home field advantages. Those resonate with me. Now, they might not resonate with someone else, so I might just start buying some of those and just burying them in the back of the closet. And so I think that having the fact that I just like those, there's a chance that someone else will want them and just doesn't appreciate them. Those are the types of cards where I guess they came out with chrome versions of them, or the rare varietals and high grades just could end up being harder to find. But the core of it is like, oh, I like this. This is like a cool card. So I think if you're really hoping for outstripped returns, it's about listening to what you actually really like as a collector versus what could this do in 6 months?
Yeah. And it's certainly not about following the latest trend, because that's actually a way where it's easy to get burned if you're hopping on the trend after the trend's already been on fire for a while, whether that's the hottest player or the insert that has suddenly become really popular. You almost have to be there ahead of the trend, which is really tricky. But I do think there are some opportunities at play. I think you've got to look around. Like I think if you look towards the future, one thing I find very interesting is the fact that PSA is going to start grading comic books and magazines in the near future. They're setting up to launch magazine grading, comic book grading this next year. What opportunities does that bring? As I look around your room here, you've got all kinds of signed Sports Illustrated magazines. They're maybe not behind me, but there's a bunch of them up on the wall over here that I'm looking at. And and of course, some of those you can get graded today by CGC. But as I'm thinking about PSA coming onto the scene, could that be an area where you could be buying magazines today for not that expensive, and then, getting the PSA grading them with PSA when that comes online and selling those, down the road? Could we see a large rise in that? We saw a big rise in the Star Jordans from 1984. Part of the reason for that rise was because PSA started grading them. PSA was not grading Star Jordans for many, many, many years because there were too many counterfeits and they weren't confident in their ability to tell the difference between the counterfeits and the real ones. But once they became confident in their ability, they started grading them a few years ago. And now recently we've seen a huge surge in that market. Could the same thing happen elsewhere? So it's all somewhat speculative, but you've used the word thesis a couple of times. That's a word that I hear other investors within cards and collectibles use. You put together a thesis. Actually, talk to people about that, like the concept of putting together a thesis that you believe in and then investing in.
So I think that using your example of PSA grading magazines, what's going to be unique there is that they're going to have dual graded magazines. So that hasn't existed to date. So you're going to have a grade on the magazine and a grade on the autograph, and it's going to be in that familiar slab. I will warn people, slab magazines are very bulky, right? So, there's some limitations there, but that what you're saying is a thesis, that signed magazines have room for growth once PSA starts slabbing them and dual grading them. That's a very reasonable thesis. I think also understanding kind of the element, the thesis is also having a story. So Darren Ravel, who you've had on, he always thinks about what's the story this piece tells. And I think that helps. So think about the story of your own thesis and like, what's the start of the thesis, what's the middle, and then what's the end. Play it all the way through, right? So not just like, what's the story of the significance of this athlete or item, but like, what's the story and timeline of this thesis, and having real buy-sell sort of limits. And I would say that, I hate to say this, that everything's for sale. In some ways, nothing's for sale. But, my Mahomes gold, because of some of the offers I've gotten on it, and he's not like my all-time GOAT, it might be foolish for me not to take those offers, even if I think the card could then double, right? So I think understanding your limits. So have a vision with a timeline, but then also kind of, hey, if the card's willing, it goes up this much, I'm going to sell, or the item goes up this much, I'm going to sell. But also, if the market drops, are you that willing to buy? Because that's oftentimes, when we talk about the Luka, one of the reasons I bought so many Lukas was because the bottom fell out of it when they all returned from grading. So rather than being a seller, I was a buyer. And I think having the discipline and have a thesis, have a story, have a timeline, and then stick to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's still opportunity. It may not be as easy as just buying a bunch of, cards of the new hot rookie anymore. Like it was that easy back during, previous years within the growth of the hobby. But you got to be a little more ahead of the curve today, but there's still opportunities. There's absolutely opportunities out there.
Well, so to that point, something that I think you talked about, the 84 star Jordan, the other guys haven't gone nuts.
Right. That yes, great point. Right.
This is
great
not financial
point.
advice, and I'm not doing it because I just don't have the time to deal with it. But like, why aren't people buying up the
Charles
Elijah
Barkley,
Wan,
who's in that set? Yeah, exactly.
Or even like the early birds and Julius Ergens. I mean, these cards are like $40 cards that you put in a PSA slab. Who knows? Again, that's a thesis, right? That once Jordan, it's a trickle down effect. And actually, we saw it during the craziness of the boom. There being trickle down effects. One of the big things where I had a lot of success was buying cards, getting them signed, slabbing them, doing that process.
Yeah.
So fascinatingly, Ryan Fitterman had a signing with Undertaker at his shop. I don't know, this is like 2016 or 17. I got two 1991 classic rookies of his signed. They both came back 10 autos. I kept one. I sold one. It was the first one that had sold in like forever. It did like $1,700. I think that card's readily now a $300, $400 card on the market. Maybe it's a little bit more than that. But the point was that it was a little bit early to the signed card fad. Now what's happened is all these autograph promoters, all these autograph dealers, they're loading up on signed cards. The market's actually a little bit flooded. I still believe in signed cards. I recently noticed that Joe Montana, if you want to get him to sign a card at the National or another public signing, I think that's considered a premium item, and it's like $399, maybe $499. His rookie's like $899 to get signed. He did some sort of bulk deal with one of these autograph dealers because DenverAutographs.com and then Mill Creek, they have piles of Joe Montana signed cards, like random 1990s cards in Beckett holders, which is the less desirable holder, for $100 signed in a Beckett holder. Look, I did go spend $10,000 and acquired all these Joe Montana autographs. I'll probably crack some of them, try to get them dual graded across the PSA. Will that be an immediate moneymaker? Probably not. But like sometimes these dealers that have such volume and they're just working on 10 and 20% margins, don't get me wrong, my main line of business, we'd love to be at a 20% margin. If people can make money on the fringes, I think that long term, these cheap Montana signed cards are just going to disappear. I could be totally wrong, but I'm looking at the fact that if you want to get one of these signed fresh at a show, it's $400, and there's piles of them sitting in slabs at $100. Some people get nervous, because why are there hundreds of these things sitting around? So I think sometimes there's that opportunity where a market gets hot, gets flooded, and then people get nervous. Is there an opportunity there? I buy a lot of cheap signed cards just because I believe in that market.
Yeah, which is one that has become more and more popular recently. You've seen the price of vintage on-card autographs and how they've just absolutely exploded over the course of the last few years. I know that's something you collect a lot of. I collect a lot of as well. And so, autograph cards in general, I think, it's definitely an interesting market to watch. Okay, I want to talk. Let's talk about your Luka story, and then I want to talk a little bit about selling, because obviously part of building a big collection is then the ability to know what to sell, what to let go, and how to let it go to buy the next thing. But let's talk about that story of the Luka cards that you acquired and how that actually helped propel a lot of your collection of what you have here.
Right. So with the Giannis early investment, the issue is I just didn't buy enough. And so the thesis was the next time I see someone I really believe in, I'm just going to go that much heavier. So I was acquiring a lot of Luka by ripping 2018 Prism Blasters from Target, buying them on ComC Raw for $5, and then getting them graded. Grading backlog actually started then. So think December 2018 through April, and then it never stopped really. But what used to take a month to get a card back became literally 5 months, in large part because of the popularity of this Prism set with Trae Young and the other rookies, and obviously Luka. And by the time all of us who were opening it around Christmas were getting our cards back from PSA, these were like $40 cards. And I had sold some via Probesty, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I shouldn't be selling. I should be buying. So I slowly just started buying. I was buying PSA 10 silvers for between $250 and $700. I was buying PSA 10 bases for between $40 and $100.
This would have been summer 2019?
Summer 2019. Yeah. I got my hands on a couple True Blues that were in BGS holders, a couple of the Reds, some signed silvers, some signed, the other version of the signature. So at one point I probably had 300 base 10s, maybe 30 silver 10s, a couple of the color variations, and then probably 20 of the signed Prism cards. And I was just kind of waiting, and I've got pictures of it on my phone and sending it to my friends that sort of knew about sports cards. I'm like, this is actually nuts what you're doing. And then fast forward, the boom. First, he started picking up a little bit, Christmas of 2019. And then obviously went into the pandemic. And I think, obviously Market Movers has this, but in July 2020, I think that moved up to $200 pretty quickly. And so I was selling into that, but it went from 200 to like 2,000.
The base card you're talking about?
Base card.
Yeah, PSA 10.
Yeah. And so one thing I did was I didn't sell them all immediately, despite having really good returns. I kind of just let things happen the way they happened. And with the silver, I was selling a bunch of silvers at 2,000. My final silver that I sold, and I was like, I think I'm going to regret selling this. I don't know if I'm going to regret selling it. I mean, I got $9,000 for it. I don't know what it's back to today. But ultimately I had about $30,000 invested in Luka by the time I cleared everything out. And I did end up clearing it all out except for like a small handful of cards. And currently I only have one 2018 Luka. It's the blue ice. I mean, I think I netted $400,000. And I got lucky. So one of the cards that I then bought was a 52 Topps Jackie Robinson PSA 7. I think I paid like $8,000 for it, maybe $10,000. And then that market got nutty. And that became a $30,000 card. And I was like, I can't not sell it. So that 400,000 then maybe became $1 million. And that's quite frankly where a lot of the value in my case today came from, was just kind of and again, I was just a little bit ahead of each of the curves. Once I saw modern going nuts, I was like, it's going to trickle down.
Right. Got to go back to vintage.
Yeah. And then, I mentioned the Bo Jackson 1990 scores that I'd bought. I did well actually flipping a handful of LeBron cards. It was just kind of being like, can I just be a couple months ahead of the trend now, because we're in a little bit slower of a period in terms of the definition of boom. What was kind of like a 8-month matriculation for all that to happen, it might just be 8 years now. But if you are ahead of the trend and you believe in the trend, I think there is that opportunity.
Yeah. You got to think longer term now is, I think, really important. I've been buying a lot of Dream Team era stuff. I've been buying tons of USA Basketball Dream Team, 92, I've been 96 Olympics, some of that stuff. And the reason why I've been doing that, and I'm talking cards, I'm talking memorabilia, a lot of memorabilia. And, as I think about like, where's the community going to be in 20 or 30 years? The NBA is going to be celebrating its 100th year anniversary. It recently, a few years ago, celebrated its 75th year anniversary. When the NBA hits 100 years old, just over 20 years from now, that's going to be a huge moment for the NBA. It will be very celebrated. And much like when they did their 75th anniversary, when they do their 100th anniversary, they're going to trot out the living legends of the game and really feature them. Well, who are going to be the living legends of the game? Well, it's going to be all of those Dream Team era players. They're going to be in their 80s. Hopefully they're all still with us. But it's guys like, it's hard to think about Michael Jordan as a 80-something-year-old or Larry Bird as a 90-year-old, if he's still around at that point in time, or, Magic Johnson, guys like that. But that's where they will be when the NBA celebrates its 100th year anniversary. So when I think about what that could bring in terms of attention, 50-year anniversary of the Dream Team, it will be in 2042. So here we are. I'm thinking ahead to that as well, right? So we're 18 years away from the 50th anniversary of the Dream Team. What's that going to look like? How's that going to be celebrated? What pop is that going to get in the media? And what attention is that going to bring back to Dream Team cards and memorabilia? You're talking about the greatest basketball team potentially of all time. You're talking about the greatest players of all time. I've been scooping up as much of that stuff as I can from that era, because I think that when I think 18, 20, 22 years out within that range of what's going to happen, I think that's got the opportunity to really, have just a huge spotlight shined on it.
So I think it's a great thesis. And I think another thing to think about when having a evaluation of what your plan is, understanding sales channels. So I'll come back to the 92 Dream Team because I have an idea about it. But like one of the things is these cards, between shipping and seller and buyer fees, it is a pretty expensive market. So you've got to take those into consideration. I think about shipping, and I think about, to me, my favorite 1992 Dream Team item is Starting Lineup did a box set.
I've seen that, yeah.
And it displays really well. It's ready to go. Just put it on a shelf. And I've actually got a couple of them. I have the Delusion. I've got Larry Bird that signed a couple of them. I mean, like, and then I'm thinking about like shipping this thing around. I think about channel. You have a channel because you have retail. So you don't have to deal with like the cost of shipping. So if you're going to shows a lot or you have a retail location, what you inventory can be a thesis. I think that you could do very well just buying up all of those, or maybe there's someone who has those sets in bulk and you just having them in your store where people are saving on the shipping. The fact that you've got the convenience of it's there and it's not shipped, there might be $50 to $100 per set that you can just grab because you're a retail operation. Now, I don't have that opportunity because I'm not a retail operation and I don't go to shows. So I think that's the other thing, is understanding what platform is this going to go to. And I think about the concept of buy it now versus auction. And one of my better flips was keeping in mind some people are scared of buy it nows. I had a 2001 Ichiro Topps Chrome Retrofractor. That's what they called them then. PSA 10, no pop, low pop, minimal transaction. And it was just sitting there during the boom, just sitting there, I think for like $1,000. I bought it because some are just scared to buy it. I bought it. I sold it 2 months later for $10,000. So again, understanding the channels and sometimes arbitrage opportunity from setting up at show versus having a retail store versus taking a buy it now to auction and having some confidence. But also you have to do enough of it. That's the other thing I tell people with auctions is people will send one item in and it doesn't do great and they get disappointed and they blame Ken or they blame Heritage or whatever it is. I'd say people, if you send them 10 items, 3 are going to underperform, 3 are going to do exactly what you think, 3 are going to do better than you think, and then that final one, who knows? But so you have to look at things from kind of like this bulk perspective and understanding the value of the channel and the cost of selling on those channels.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of selling, you shared an interesting story about how you, when you're trying to buy a big item, sometimes you force yourself to sell a lot of smaller items to pay for the big item. And sometimes you actually force yourself to identify what those smaller items are going to be that you're going to sell while you're bidding on the big item to kind of hold yourself true to that. Talk to me about that.
So, I mean, with that Jackie Robinson debut ticket, it was certainly the most amount of money I've ever spent on anything besides a house at the time. And so as the auction kept going and going, I was like, I'm going to have to finance this with consignment. So I just started grabbing stuff that I felt I was willing to sell. And then every time the bid went up, I went and grabbed more stuff. And by the end of the night, I made the final bid. There was just a pile of a couple $100,000 worth of items on my living room table. And I was like, would I trade the Jackie ticket for all this? And the answer was yes. Now, I do think there's probably times where I've bought things saying to myself, oh, I've got plenty of consignment items laying around. And then all of a sudden it's like, shoot, I'm actually thinner than I thought right now. So actually having the discipline of whether you've got a great spreadsheet or you're using market movers to track everything, having the discipline of saying, let me make sure I actually have the capacity to keep bidding. And I think just quite frankly, being organized has proven well. Right now, the last couple months have been a little bit softer on some things, but because I've had an understanding of my willingness to sell, I think I've gotten some pretty good deals on a few items.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's if you look around, like one of my, I guess you would say, hobbies is I love spending time on auction websites. I love spending time combing through all of the pages of the upcoming auctions on Golden and Heritage and Fanatics Collect and all of the different auction sites. And sometimes you can, as you said, like sometimes as a seller, you're surprised certain items sell for a lot, certain items sell for less than what you would think. As a buyer, sometimes you can find items, buried in the catalogs that you're like, that item right now is selling for way less than what I thought that would sell for. And you can find value. You can scoop up items, especially the ones that are not necessarily the premium headline ones that are focused on by the auction house, but the ones that are a little bit deeper in the catalog. Sometimes there's some real treasures that can be found.
I mean, I think that might be a thesis. If you were very disciplined and said, I'm going to set aside $10,000 to buy $100 or less items, in PWCC Fanatics Collects auction and Golden's auctions. Nothing against those auction houses. I do a lot of business with them. I love all the people there. But those items under $100, I mean, I just had some auctions rip off, like, not rip off, I sold them. The auction went, that's the term, like let the auction rip, that I expected like $200 for, and they're ending at like $30. Now, some people might say, well, why didn't you tell your buddy to bid on it? Part of me is kind of okay. Like now look, I'm uniquely, I've got a nice collection. So like, it's not going to bother me to sell something for 30 that I could have gotten 200 for. Cause I like the fact that maybe there's some entrepreneurial guy who's like, I'm willing to take this and I'm willing to sit on it on eBay for 8 months. That could be the value. Just someone like me who just was wanting to get that out of my PWCC vault, let it rip. It sold for what it sold for. I wanted it gone immediately. Someone just having the patience to wait for the right buyer to come along. So I think that to your point about spending time combing through these auction houses, to me, I think it's such a big opportunity. I see these people spending all this time combing through the dollar boxes. It shows, you have no idea how, and look, that's fun. People like to do what they want to do. Comb through the hypothetical dollar box that is some of these auctions on the bottom end of it.
Yeah, you're right. There's values to be had for sure. Yeah, values to be had. Okay. For somebody starting out, we're going to wrap up kind of with this question. With somebody starting out today with a much more limited budget, but with the aspiration to someday be sitting in this room with these types of cards on their own room with those types of cards, where would you kind of guide them to, kind of cut their teeth and learn their lessons and get their start?
I like the idea of forcing yourself to sift through those online auctions. And rather than sorting from lowest lot number and highest price, sort from lowest price and force yourself to go through 500 items and look at comps, and then have the willingness to put in bids. I've got a handful of friends who, and it's a card they have no interest in, but they saw that the most recent legitimate comps were around 200 and they'll bid $100. Okay. They might only win like 10% of the items. So they're doing a lot of work, doing a lot of research, but what they're winning, there is margin. So I think that we were talking about, like, we don't know the clear path, like buying Wemby today is not like buying Luka in 2018, but there are all these auctions where if you have knowledge, right? So being willing to invest the time to get the knowledge, use the tools, use, market movers, use past completed auction sales, and have a thesis again of like, I'm willing to always pay $100 for any card that has a comp within the last 6 months for $200. And then the discipline of bidding, paying, getting it in, getting it relisted, and managing that inventory. That's hard work and education, which quite frankly are like the tenements to almost any kind of business, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's not easy money. There was a lot of easy money to be made in sports cards in 2019, 2020. There's not what I would define as easy money to be made in cards anymore. But there is money to be made. As you said, it takes effort. It takes dedication. It does. There's different ways to do it. I saw at the National this year, my son made a ton of money at the National this year. And what he was doing was he was going around and he found a dealer who obviously I'm sure had a deal with a repacker where the dealer said, if you bring me any downtown or Kaboom card, I will buy it from you at 95% of the last comp. Doesn't matter what downtown or Kaboom card it was. So my son was walking around, going to all the groups of people that were doing trades and everything like that. And he said, hey, I'll give you, 85% of the value of that downtown card in cash right now. Or I'll give you 90% of the value of that Kaboom card in cash right now. Would pay the person out, would immediately walk over to the dealer, sell it for 95%. He wasn't making that much money per transaction. He was maybe making $30, $20, $40 per card, but he did it over and over and made over $1,000, just doing this over the course of a day or two, which for a 13-year-old, that's really good money. It just took, kind of a thesis, and his thesis was downtown and Kabooms, I can resell for basically market price or close to it. So if I can get even a decent deal on it, there's opportunity to be made. People can employ the same strategy with going from raw to grade, right? Searching show floors for really good condition raw cards and looking to grade. Finding auction deals, as you said, doing negotiation with dealers at card shows to, try to get cards below comps and then reselling. There is a lot of way to make money. It's just not easy money anymore. It's work, it's dedication. But if you put in the time and effort, you can build a kernel of, something that grows, and over time, if you are then reinvesting that into the right cards and willing to be patient, there is opportunity over time to build up a really incredible collection.
And two more ideas to leave aspiring entrepreneurs with, if they're willing to get their hands dirty. When I go to shows and there's autographed guests, it's shocking how hard it is to find their cards to get signed, or their Sports Illustrated to get signed, or unique photos to get signed. If you're at a card show, and one of my friends in the hobby said that he was walking around the binder of like Ricky Bottalico cards, who was signing at the show, and the show had like just generic 8x10s. He was selling like Ricky Bottalico cards that were 10 cents on ComC for $5 to $10 because people had nothing else to get signed.
Yeah.
I mean,
great point.
So load up, have a show where you just load up on stuff for the autograph guests to sign. The other option, I think we talked about this a little bit, is I think the real opportunity in the hobby is more regional approach. Like, hey, what if you're just buying a bunch of Astros signed pack pulled cards on eBay, and then you're just marking them up 30% when you're in Houston? I think that like having a curated table or a curated store based on where you are geographically is a real opportunity. And also, the value you see it in your store, the value of it being there and ready to buy, people will pay a premium. So why don't you curate your card show table to get that, spur of the moment, buyer? So I think those are some real opportunities. Again, work, research, thinking outside the box a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. All right, Patrick, for anybody out there who wants to connect with you, who wants to follow you and learn more about your collection and hear your advice, how do they do that?
Best place is Instagram, the P. Ryan Collection. I am also somewhat active on Twitter. More talking about ticket industry stuff at P. Ryan Texas on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me. Happy to try to connect. And however I can be helpful, I'd like to be helpful.
There you go. This has been a great show. Thank you for sharing your advice with us and also your collection with our audience as well. Appreciate it. And thank you for everybody watching. And just a reminder that the full-length episodes of The Geoff Wilson Show are available on YouTube under The Geoff Wilson Show channel, but they're also available on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify under The Geoff Wilson Show. So make sure to subscribe everywhere. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon with our next one. Take care.